Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to look at volumes and snapshots, and this is going to be a lab, so you'll need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so I've logged into the AWS console, so I just want to go over to EC2. So we have a quick look at our running instances and just have a note the instance ID, so it ends in 510D. Now let's go ahead here and click on volumes, and we can see this volume here, and if we scroll down we can see the state is in use. We can also see that up here, and then we can see the attachment information, so we can see that it's attached to 510D, which is called my web server. So this is our root device volume, and this just means that our operating system is installed on this volume. So this is our virtual disk that's attached to our EC2 instance. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new virtual disk. We have different types, so just click on create volume. The different types here are general purpose, provisioned IOPS. Now we can select cold, HDD, and throughput optimized, simply because it's no longer the root device volume. And we can also select magnetic, which we could select as our root device volume. So I'm going to say, let's call this cold HDD. And how big do we want this volume? So the minimum is 500 gigs, the maximum is up to 16 terabytes. So I'm going to say, yep, give me 500 gigs, volume. IOPS is not applicable. If we change this over to provisioned IOPS, we'd be able to see our IOPS here. Same with general purpose, it will give us a calculation. But I'm going to go back to cold HDD, and this is going to be basically a file server that we're going to create. Now, do note here the availability zone, so you can choose which availability zone you want this volume to go in. And if this volume is in an availability zone that's different to your EC2 instance, then you will not be able to attach it to your EC2 instance. So we can see down here my availability zone that my root device volume is in is EU West 2A. So it's probably a good idea to keep my secondary volume in that availability zone, because if it was in another availability zone, I'd not be able to attach it. And then we can even go in here and encrypt this volume. I'm going to cover off encryption in the next lab, so we'll just leave it blank for now. So we don't want to encrypt it. We'll go ahead and hit create. And so that is going to go and create a volume. If we just hit refresh here, we can see it, well, that was really quick. Normally it can take some time, but you can see the state is already available. So this volume is now available to be attached to our EC2 instance. So let's go ahead and go to actions and attach our volume, and we're going to just click in here and you select your web server. So we're going to attach it to our web server, and it tells you that it's going to potentially be connected either to /dev/SDF or /dev/XD XVDF, and that's probably more likely because this is a newer Linux kernel. And if you don't know what any of this means, don't worry, we will show you. So I'm going to go ahead and attach it to my EC2 instance, so we can, and it can take a little bit of time. And there we go, we can see that the state has now changed to in use, so it is attached. So the very next thing I want you to do is to SSH into your EC2 instance. Okay, so I'm in my terminal window, so I'm going to SSH into my EC2 instance. So EC2-user @ and then the public IP address, and then we use our key, which is my EC2 key pair. So there we go. I'm going to elevate my privileges to root, so sudo su, and I'm going to clear the screen. Now if we type lsblk, this will tell us all the virtual disks that are attached to this EC2 instance. So we can see here we've got XVDA1, and you can actually see that it is attached to our root directory. So this is our root device volume. So the mount point is just /. Now we also have XVDF, and it's not attached to anything right now. So what we're going to need to do is to mount this. Now before we go and mount it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directory. So I'm going to go to cd /, and then I'm going to make a directory just called my file server, something like that. If we just go into my file server, we can see that there's nothing in there right now. So we just type in ls, it's empty. So I'm going to come out of it, and then I'm just going to clear the screen again. Okay, so I'm just going to type lsblk again, hit enter. So we can see our volume here, we can see the size, it's 500 gigs. Right now it doesn't have a mount point. Before I go ahead and mount it though, a really good habit to get into is to check if this volume has any data on it. And to do that, we just type in file, -s, and then dev, and then xvdf, and hit enter. And if it says data, That basically means there's no data on that particular volume. So in order to, before we're going to go ahead and mount it, what we want to do is we want to format the volume. And the reason we want to format it is because right now it's just raw storage. So in order to format it, all we're doing is we're saying make file system and then the type. And then we want ext4, which is the most common file system for Linux PCs. If you were doing this in Windows, it would be NTFS. And then we just need to do the directory, so dev xvdf, or the mount point rather. So go ahead and hit enter. That's going to just take a little bit of time, but it will go ahead and basically just format our volume. Because it is 500 gigs, it probably will take, oh, well, there you go. Well, it didn't take as long as I thought. So now that our volume is formatted, all we need to do now is to mount it. So it's really simple to do. All we need to do is type in mount and then the path. So it's xvdf. And we want to mount this to our directory that we created called file server. And it wasn't called file server, it's called my file server. So called my file server. There we go. So now if we go into my file server and type in ls, we can see that it's empty apart from the lost and found directory, which is created by default when we create our volume and put a file system on there. So I've just cleared the screen to make it easier to follow. So now what we want to do is we want to create a file in here. So let's just type in nano, we'll call it index.html, and I'm just going to again do some quick HTML. Just do h1v hello cloud gurus, and then we end our header and we end our HTML. So go ahead and hit Control X, save it by hitting yes, and then hit enter. And now if we type in ls, we can see that has been created there. I might just want to create one more file just for the hell of it, say hello, and then we're going to output this to call it hello.txt, just so we've got multiple files. So there we go, we've got hello.txt and index.html. And now I'm just going to come out of this, and what I'm going to do, if we just type in lsblk, by the way, you can now see that xvdf has got a mount point of my file server. So now what we want to do is we want to unmount this, and it's umount, not unmount. So umount and then /dev/xvdf, and there we go, that's unmounted the volume. Now let's switch back to the AWS console. Okay, so I'm in the AWS console. And now what I want to do is just go over to volumes, and I can see my volume ID here. It's still in use, but we have unmounted it, and what we want to do now is just detach the volume. So we go ahead and hit detach. If you didn't unmount it, you would get an error message, and then you can go in and just force a detach. That also works. And it can take a little bit of time to detach, but there you go, if you hit refresh, it's now being detached. Okay, so right now we have this volume. It's got 500 gigs of storage on it. We've created a file system over this volume, so it's extension 4. And then now what we want to do, and we've created a couple of files in there. So we've got our hello.txt and our index.html. So what we want to do now is we're going to create a snapshot of this volume. So all we do is we select it here, and then we go to Actions and go to Create Snapshot. And in here, I'm just going to call it My File Server Snap. And then we'll use the same description. You can see that it's not encrypted, and you can't change that at this stage, and we'll cover on how to do encryption in the next lab. And we'll go ahead and hit create. So now what we're doing is we're creating a snapshot of this volume. Snapshots are basically point in time photographs of the virtual hard disk, and this photograph, is the best way to think of it, is actually going to be stored on S3. And then every time you take a new snapshot, only the data that's changed is stored on S3. So it's incremental updates. So every time you take a snapshot, you're not going to be storing 500 gigs. You're just going to be storing the changed data. So this can take a little bit of time. I'm just going to go and pause the video and wait for this volume to finish being snapped. Okay, so my snapshot is now complete. We can see in here its status is completed. I'm going to go back to my volumes, and I'm going to go in and just delete this one. And remember the type was SC1. So I'm going to go ahead and hit delete. Yes, delete. And so that is now deleting that volume. Now, if I go back to my snapshots, I've got my snapshot here. what I can do is I can create a volume from this snapshot. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. I'm going to create my volume, going to make sure it's in the same availability zone as my EC2 instance in order for this to work. I can actually change the size of the volume here. I could make it larger if I wanted, but I'm going to keep it at 500 gigs. And if you look here, I can actually change the volume type. So we've taken essentially taken a snapshot of the volume and taken a photograph of the volume, but you're not locked into the storage medium that you originally took that snapshot from. So I can actually now move this. I can make it SSD general purpose, or I could make it provisioned IOPS SSD. I don't have to make it cold HDD. So I'm just going to make this general purpose, and I'm going to leave everything else as default. Go ahead and hit create. That's now going to create my volume. We click back here and go over to volumes. We can see that that volume is now available. Let's go ahead and attach it to, before we do, let's just quickly go over to our console and just type in here lsblk. And you can see that there's nothing attached. You've just got the root device volume, which is xvda. We go back over here. We can try and attach this to our EC2 instance. So I'm just going to click in here and go ahead and hit attach. And now the state has changed from to in use. And then if I go back here and type lsblk again, we can now see we've got the xvdf volume. And if I actually just go over to cd my file server, because the directory still exists, you can see that there's nothing in there. So there's still nothing in there, but that directory itself actually does exist. And now all we need to do is we need to go in and attach this volume, and we're going to mount it to the my file server directory. Now, if you remember last time, what we did is we actually just checked if there was data on the volume. So we're going to do that again. We're going to go file -f s, and then it's dev/xvdf, and hit enter. And you can see that there is extension for file system data already on here. So we don't want to go in and then just install a new file system over that volume, because we're going to wipe all the data. So it has an existing file system already installed on there. So the very next thing we need to do is we just need to say mount, then dev xvdf. We're going to mount that to the my file server directory. And there we go. Now if we just go into my file server and we type in ls, and there we go, we can see our text files. So we've got our index.html and our nano. I'm just going to clear the screen. So let's open up index.html, so nano index.html, and we can see our data is still intact as well. Okay, so that's really it for this lecture, guys. So what have we learned? Well, we've learned that volumes exist on elastic block storage, and a volume is basically just a virtual hard disk. So when you see it in your exams, they're talking about an EBS volume. That's a virtual hard disk that's attached to your EC2 instance. If they talk about root device volumes, all that means is the volume that an operating system is installed onto. So it's going to be your Linux operating system or your Windows operating system. We then learned that when we take a snapshot, they're stored on S3. Snapshots are simply just point-in-time copies of volumes, so it's just like taking a photo of the disk. And snapshots are incremental, so this means that only the blocks that have changed since your last snapshot are moved to S3. So it's literally just taking so it's literally storing the changes for each additional snapshot that you take. And then if this is your first snapshot, it might take some time to create, but the process does get faster as you continue to snap your EBS volumes. So in the next lab, we're going to create an Amazon machine image, and we're going to see how we can make our root device volumes encrypted, how we go about doing that. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.